faithfully convey value, interpret global good books. Hello, this is Sally Tells Stories. I'm Lynn Bohu. Today, I'm introducing a recently quite popular new book called Fact, with the English title Factfulness. Actually, the English original of this book made the New York Times bestseller list right after its publication last April. Sally Tells Stories had already interpreted the original version last year when the Chinese translation wasn't even published yet. And back then, I translated the book title as Factualism. And since the following explanation is from earlier, both the title and some concepts retain those provisional translations, please kindly understand. Bill Gates has extremely high praise for this book. He said, "This is one of the most important books I've ever read. It's indispensable for guiding people to truly understand the world." Now, the English title is Factfulness. Don't worry if it sounds unfamiliar. It's a word coined by the author. Fact, we know, means truth. Combining the book's content, this coined word essentially means that only by understanding the world's fundamental facts can we gain clear perception. And in this process, we must restrain our various unreliable instincts. So, this truth seeking, pragmatic attitude is what we call factualism. The book's content, as the title suggests, revolves around the concept of facts to explain why we hold so many misconceptions about the world, or rather, what errors we frequently make when observing the world that prevent us from gaining accurate understanding. Moreover, if we see through these errors, we realize the world is actually far less terrible than we imagine. Before discussing specifics, I think the author's own remarkable story deserves mention. The author of this bestseller is Hans Rosling, a Swedish writer, renowned professor of international health at Sweden's Karolinska Institute, and a practicing physician. He served as an advisor to WHO and UNICEF, working extensively in economic development and human health, particularly pancreatic cancer. Professor Rosling frequently traveled among major institutions, aiming to change top leaders' ingrained worldviews through his lectures. Unfortunately, a few years ago, Professor Rosling was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, a highly aggressive type of cancer. As a final gift to the world, he compiled his lifelong experiences and insights into this book with his son and daughter-in-law's help, hoping to transform humanity's thinking patterns. Sadly, in 2017, Professor Rosling's condition deteriorated before the book's publication, and he passed away. So he truly was a physician who deeply understood human cognition, both psychologically and physiologically. Based on his lifetime analysis, he summarized methods and perspectives for observing the world. In this book, Professor Rosling identifies 10 common thinking instincts we fall into, which correspond to 10 cognitive limitations. Of course, these 10 limitations are interconnected. So we'll focus on explaining the most core and common ones in detail. Following the book's approach, it starts with multiple choice questions to reveal pitfalls, then teaches how to avoid these thinking traps. So using this method, let's explore together. The first thinking trap is called the gap instinct. What does that mean? Um, let's build suspense with two questions. In low-income countries, what percentage of girls receive primary education? Options: A, 20%, B, 40%, C, 60%. No overthinking, go with your instinct. So is it 20%, 40%, or 60% of girls in low-income countries receiving primary education? The correct answer is 60%. Did you get it right? Wait, there's another question before we confirm answers. The second question, where do most people worldwide live? A, low income, B, middle income, C, high income countries. No strict definitions needed. Use your intuition. Answer, B, middle income countries. Thoughts? Did you get both questions correct? If yes, congratulations. If not, no worries at all. Because in this book, there are 13 such multiple choice questions. and they were included in a survey given to people from all walks of life in 14 countries worldwide. It turned out that on average, each person only got 2 out of 13 correct, meaning the accuracy rate is less than 1/6. So even if you didn't get them right, there's no shame. But what does this less than 1/6 accuracy rate really mean? Consider that each of these multiple choice questions only has 3 options. A, B, C, even if you guessed randomly or had your cat roll a die, your accuracy would be about 1/3. What does that tell us? It shows that despite all our knowledge accumulation over the years, when we use intuition and logic seriously, our answers are worse than random chance. That's a bit awkward. So, what kind of thinking problem does this low accuracy rate reflect? This is the first human thinking instinct we mentioned earlier, the gap instinct. Simply put, we often fall into a black and white trap when viewing issues, only seeing 1 or 0, ignoring what's in between. In reality, it's not empty, it's filled with numerous intermediate states. That these intermediate states often get overlooked in our cognitive process. And the reality is that the world often exists precisely in such intermediate states. For example, with those two questions, many might think the world consists of either low income or high income countries. But actually, there isn't a huge income gap between countries worldwide. Most countries are distributed between high and low income and beyond that dichotomy. In fact, even the division between developing and developed countries is outdated. Professor Rosling discusses developing and developed countries in the book. This classification was originally created by scholars in 1965 based on average birth rates and child survival rates at the time, dividing the world into two groups. The reason for using child numbers and survival rates was that, according to the understanding then, poorer places had more backward healthcare and higher child mortality. Meanwhile, the more underdeveloped a place is, the more actively people tend to have more children. So, the definition of a developing country essentially means having both high birth rates and low survival rates. But after over half a century, this definition has become quite different from the reality of 1965. With urbanization and improved medical conditions, even very poor countries no longer have high birth rates and high mortality. Instead, they've adopted patterns similar to developed nations. Fewer children with lower mortality. Yet, although circumstances have changed, many of our perceptions haven't, still based on this gap instinct. We instinctively think the world is divided only into rich and poor countries, assuming poor countries are backward in everything, like fewer girls in school and higher child mortality. So many people getting those two questions wrong actually reflects this cognitive gap in our thinking. And please don't think this cognitive gap only applies to global affairs, that you got it wrong just because you're unfamiliar with the topic. And fundamentally, this mental blind spot affects all your perceptions, not just these issues. For example, we often say boys are good at math while girls are not. But with this mindset, we easily overlook boys who struggle with math and girls who excel at it, right? This is the thinking trap created by our gap instinct. Since we're born with this gap instinct, what should we do about it? Professor Rosling offers 3 suggestions for us to note when understanding the world. First, overall trends never represent individuals. Like the math example, when seeing boys' average scores higher than girls, you must realize averages don't reflect individual performance. Plus, averages can be misleading. They might be skewed by a few exceptional students pulling up the score. If you remove those outliers, girls often outperform boys, which leads to Professor Rosling's second suggestion. Examine extremes clearly. For example, when discussing wealth inequality, we tend to focus only on the richest and poorest groups. But remember, these two groups are minorities. Those in between form the world's mainstream. In reality, such extreme situations are exceptionally rare. Even in turbulent Palestine, you won't see everyone starving. Even in superpower America, not everyone is wealthy. Whether among people or nations, wealth distribution isn't as polarized as we imagine. So, the book suggests borrowing a statistical concept, normal distribution, meaning nearly everything follows this pattern. Few at extremes, most in the middle. When consuming news or gossip, while we focus on extremes, never forget the middle represents reality. Thirdly, the professor advises recognizing how our social status affects judgments. For instance, elites might assume everyone needs their charity since nobody matches their wealth. They likely can't distinguish between moderate and extreme poverty. Similarly, city dwellers might view rural lifestyles as backward, but that's projecting your standards onto environments you don't understand. To summarize, recognize this first thinking trap. Our gap instinct in cognition. Counter it by don't apply wholes to individuals, extremes to norms, or your standards to others.